She looked at me with a quiet intensity, her words lingering between us. Don't leave me wondering what could have been. The first time she appeared in my life, it was so ordinary that I almost missed it. A local bookstore on a quiet Saturday morning. The smell of new paper and coffee lingering in the air, sunlight spilling through tall windows. I was there to kill time, to distract myself from the restlessness of a life that hadn't yet found its rhythm. And then she was there, a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair, softly cascading over her shoulders, standing near the poetry section. Her presence was subtle, but it pulled at me in a way I hadn't anticipated. She was graceful, a natural confidence wrapped in quiet calm. Lightly tanned skin, soft laugh lines at the corners of her dark brown eyes, a curvy figure that moved effortlessly through the narrow aisles. She wore a fitted sweater and a long skirt, casual yet elegant, the kind of outfit that seemed thoughtless but was carefully chosen. Our eyes met, fleetingly, over the spine of a book she had just pulled from the shelf. There was a spark in her gaze, not the overt boldness of attraction, but something quieter, more electric. It was as though she was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time, even if she didn't know it yet. I felt my heartbeat quicken, a subtle awareness crawling up my spine as I tried to focus on the novels lining the shelves. She hummed softly while scanning the titles, a tune that seemed familiar yet impossible to place, and I realized I was noticing every tiny movement. The way her fingers lingered on the pages, the tilt of her head, the faint curl of a smile tugging at her lips. For a moment, the world outside the bookstore ceased to exist. I wasn't thinking about time or obligations. I was thinking about her, about the quiet weight of her presence. I gathered the courage to step closer, pretending to browse the nearby shelf. The scent of her perfume, soft, floral, with a hint of something warm and earthy, floated toward me, unassuming yet intoxicating. My fingers brushed against a book, and I glanced up to find her watching me with a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Hi," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the hush of the store. She turned slightly, as if startled, then returned my greeting with a nod and a soft, "Hello." Her smile was brief but warm, enough to leave a lingering impression that I couldn't shake. I moved to another aisle, pretending to examine a novel I had no intention of reading, but I kept glancing back at her. She settled into a quiet corner with a notebook, scribbling something rapidly, perhaps a poem or a fleeting thought. I didn't dare approach, yet. I didn't want to break the fragile spell that seemed to hover between us. By the time I left the bookstore, I knew one thing for certain. Something in that brief encounter had stirred a part of me I hadn't felt before. Something quiet, electric, and unspoken. And though we had exchanged barely a word, I couldn't stop thinking about her. That day, an ordinary morning had transformed into the beginning of something I wasn't ready to name, but couldn't ignore. After that first encounter at the bookstore, I found myself noticing her in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't stalking. I reassured myself of that. It was a simple awareness, a curiosity that lingered in the back of my mind, making ordinary places feel charged with possibility. A coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment became a kind of stage where our paths crossed more often than chance might allow. She was always there in the late mornings, seated at the same small table near the window, sunlight catching her long black hair and highlighting the subtle tan of her skin. Today, she was wearing a soft cream blouse tucked into a flowing navy skirt, a pair of delicate earrings catching the light. Her posture was relaxed but poised, an effortless grace that seemed natural yet deliberate. She held a steaming cup of coffee between her hands, and I could see the faint, gentle lines around her eyes deepen as she smiled at the barista's joke. I told myself it was just coffee that drew me here. But the moment our eyes met, that excuse dissolved. There was recognition in her glance. Not just polite acknowledgement, but something quieter, intimate, and observant. She gestured subtly to the empty chair across from her. "It's still empty," she said softly, voice calm and warm. There was no hesitation in the invitation, only a measured curiosity, as if she, too, felt the pull but was careful not to name it. Sitting across from her, the world contracted. The aroma of roasted beans, the faint rustle of pages from nearby readers, and the soft hum of conversation faded into a gentle backdrop. Our dialogue was tentative at first, skimming ordinary topics. Books we loved, the rhythm of the city streets, the rain from earlier that morning making puddles gleam under sunlight. But every now and then, her gaze would linger on me, thoughtful and unhurried, and I felt a subtle charge in those moments, a quiet desire tempered by awareness. Her laughter surprised me one time, small but full, as if it had been waiting somewhere deep in her chest, and it loosened something in me I hadn't realized was so tight. I caught myself noticing the little details, the curve of her smile, the way her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, the warmth radiating through her sleeve as she shifted in her chair. There was something mesmerizing in the way she could be both confident and quietly vulnerable, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Hours passed almost unnoticed. Our hands occasionally brushed when passing a notebook back and forth, and each touch was electric yet respectful, leaving a warm pulse lingering longer than expected. She tilted her head, dark eyes meeting mine with an expression that balanced amusement and quiet curiosity. "Time behaves differently for you," she said gently, her words light but meaningful. "Maybe," I replied, "but right now I think it's behaving just fine." She smiled again, slower this time, a subtle acknowledgement of something neither of us could yet name. It was in that shared, unspoken understanding that I realized what started as a casual curiosity was transforming into something deeper, something impossible to ignore. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet thrill of possibility, the sense that the ordinary could shift into something extraordinary simply because of her presence. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the dynamic between us subtly shifted, the kind of moment that seemed unremarkable on the surface, yet carried the weight of unspoken possibilities. We found ourselves walking through the small neighborhood park, sunlight filtering through the leaves in soft, warm patterns, creating a patchwork of light and shadow on the path. The 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair, graceful, confident, and quietly beautiful, walked beside me, her posture relaxed yet elegant. She wore a light, flowy blouse and jeans, casual but poised, her dark brown eyes reflecting the sunlight and something unspoken within. I, 24, felt the familiar stir of awareness that had been growing steadily over our encounters. The conversation began lightly, about mundane things, the way the wind rustled the autumn leaves, a stray dog trotting past, the distant laughter of children. Yet beneath this ordinary chatter, there was an undercurrent of trust forming. At one point, she paused near a wooden bench, resting her hand lightly on the back as she turned to share something personal, a memory of a decision she had made years ago, a dream she had set aside, and the quiet regret that lingered still. I listened, genuinely absorbing every word, every nuance. There was no judgment in her eyes, only openness, the kind that invites honesty and makes the listener feel privileged to be trusted. She noticed my attention and smiled faintly, a subtle curve of lips that carried both vulnerability and quiet reassurance. Her fingers traced the edge of the bench absent-mindedly, and when our hands brushed as I adjusted my grip on mine, the contact lingered slightly longer than necessary. It was innocent yet charged, a whisper of connection neither of us dared to define. I realized then that these small gestures, the brush of fingers, the tilt of her head as she considered her words, the soft cadence of her voice, carried a depth I hadn't anticipated. There was a magnetic tension that wasn't physical in the traditional sense, but emotional, intimate in the truest sense of the word. Each pause, each glance, seemed weighted with meaning. We stopped near a fountain, water sparkling under the sun, and she laughed softly at something I had said, the sound full and warm, filling the quiet space around us. I felt an involuntary pull toward her, the desire to close the gap, to reach out and offer a steadying hand, yet I held back, aware that restraint itself was part of this delicate dance. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and the crispness of fallen leaves, grounding us in the moment. I could sense her subtle shifts in posture, the way her shoulders softened slightly when she spoke freely, the small catch in her breath when a memory lingered too long. We had not yet defined what this was, and perhaps that was what made it so powerful. The quiet tension of shared vulnerability, the unspoken acknowledgement that we were slowly weaving trust and intimacy between us. As we walked back toward the street, I caught her eyes lingering on mine, a gentle question hidden in the depths of her gaze. I realized then that we were stepping onto new ground, one of quiet trust and delicate closeness, where emotions were no longer hidden but explored slowly, reverently, as if afraid to break the fragile connection that was forming. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of what had begun, a bond not yet named, but undeniably present, growing stronger with every small, intimate detail. As the days passed, the quiet intimacy that had begun to bloom between us carried an increasing weight. It wasn't dramatic or overt. It was a subtle tension, one that whispered in moments of eye contact or brushed shoulders in passing. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair, graceful posture, and elegant, mature beauty had become impossible to ignore. Her dark brown eyes, framed by soft laugh lines and a gently tanned complexion, now held something unspoken, a restrained intensity that mirrored my own hesitation. We met again at a corner cafe in the late afternoon, sunlight streaming through the large windows, bouncing softly off her silky hair. She wore a fitted beige sweater and a navy skirt, simple yet effortlessly elegant, the kind of outfit that made casual look refined. I sat across from her, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. The cafe was bright and inviting, filled with the aroma of roasted beans and faint sweetness from freshly baked pastries. Yet, the space between us felt charged, each glance and pause heavier than the ambient noise around us. Our conversation began lightly, skimming familiar territory, books we loved, fleeting thoughts about the city streets, and the subtle pleasure of sunny afternoons. But under the surface, the awareness of our age difference hovered like an unspoken question. She would tilt her head slightly when I spoke, dark eyes scrutinizing but not judgmental, as if weighing the boundaries of what was acceptable. I found myself hesitating before each word, aware that expressing too much too soon could shatter the fragile balance we had built. Her fingers occasionally brushed mine when reaching for sugar or stirring her coffee, and each contact sparked a quiet awareness that left me both exhilarated and uncertain. I wanted to close the distance, to let her know how profoundly she had captured my attention, but social convention and my own insecurities held me back. The conflict was internal. Part of me urged honesty, while another part feared rejection, misunderstanding, or the perception of impropriety. She laughed softly at one of my observations, the sound carrying warmth. Yet there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a subtle acknowledgement of the same tension I felt. She leaned back, crossing her legs carefully, hands resting on the mug as if seeking comfort in its warmth. Her posture conveyed elegance, confidence, yet a trace of vulnerability lingered, the unspoken struggle of desire restrained by caution. I studied the light across her face, noting the way the sun highlighted the curve of her cheek and the softness of her smile. Every subtle expression seemed weighted with meaning. The slight narrowing of her eyes when she considered her words, the gentle tilt of her head, the way her shoulders relaxed and tensed in rhythm with the conversation. Each nuance amplified the internal conflict, making it impossible to ignore that our bond was deepening, even if neither of us had dared to define it aloud. By the time we left the cafe, the bright afternoon had given way to a golden evening, and the air was tinged with a crispness that mirrored my restless thoughts. The walk back to the streetcars was quiet, each of us lost in reflection. The tension remained, neither resolved nor abandoned, leaving me with a clear understanding. Desire and hesitation could coexist, and sometimes the hardest part of connection was simply acknowledging its existence without forcing it into words. It was the kind of afternoon that seemed designed for reflection. The sky a pale, silvery gray, the city streets glistening with the remnants of a gentle rain. I found her beneath the bookstore awning, 40-year-old American Latino woman with long black hair, gracefully poised despite the damp air. Her dark brown eyes held an intensity one hadn't seen before, the subtle curves of her lips softened by a quiet tension. She wore a light trench coat over a simple blouse and tailored pants, the kind of effortless elegance that made her seem luminous even in muted light. The moment I approached, the tension between us was palpable. Neither spoke immediately. The city around us seemed to shrink until only the space between us remained. She shifted slightly, brushing a strand of wet hair behind her ear, and I realized that even the smallest gestures carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The air smelled faintly of rain-soaked asphalt and coffee from a nearby cafe, grounding the moment in familiar, tangible sensations. Then, almost instinctively, I draped my jacket over her shoulders, the fabric warm against her skin. She looked up at me, eyes softening, and for a heartbeat, the world paused. Her hand lightly brushed mine as if to steady herself, and I felt the quiet thrum of connection ripple through both of us. It was subtle, nothing overt, but every nerve in my body responded to the simple closeness, the shared understanding that neither of us had spoken yet, but both of us felt profoundly. We began to talk, softly at first, letting words drift like the raindrops around us. She spoke of past regrets, dreams she had set aside, and moments she had never shared. Her voice carried warmth, clarity, and a hint of melancholy. I listened, offering my own truths, small confessions about hopes and fears, the uncertainty of youth, and the longing to be understood. Each exchange deepened the intimacy between us, a delicate dance of honesty and vulnerability. At one point, she let her hand rest briefly atop mine, and I felt a quiet shock of awareness. Not desire in the crude sense, but a magnetic pull toward understanding, empathy, and unspoken yearning. Her touch was light, fleeting, yet it left a warmth that lingered long after her hand moved. The way she looked at me, soft and steady, made it impossible to deny what had been quietly growing between us over weeks of casual meetings and small gestures. The rain slowed to a drizzle, sparkling on the pavement, and she tilted her head, dark eyes meeting mine with an intensity that startled me. "I can't pretend this isn't real," she admitted quietly, a tremor in her voice. There was no accusation, no expectation, only honesty, fragile and powerful. I reached out again, lightly brushing her hand with my fingertips, feeling the pulse of life, the unspoken question lingering between us. What now? We were no longer walking around the edges of something undefined. We had stepped into it, fully aware of the gravity and beauty of the connection. The moment ended not with clarity of resolution, but with a delicate acknowledgement, desire, trust, and vulnerability entwined in a way neither of us could retreat from. Every glance, every breath, every subtle touch had led to this point, and I realized that sometimes the truth of what you feel is more urgent than the fear of what might come next. The following days carried a new kind of stillness, a calm that had nothing to do with silence and everything to do with understanding. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair, graceful posture, and mature, effortless beauty seemed both familiar and impossibly captivating, like a memory I hadn't yet fully lived. Her dark brown eyes held a quiet warmth, soft laugh lines hinting at the life she carried, and a subtle elegance in the way she moved, every gesture deliberate, every smile measured yet genuine. We spent the afternoon in her living room, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, spilling across stacks of books and potted plants. She sat on the edge of a plush sofa, shoulders relaxed but composed, wearing a cream blouse and flowing navy skirt, casual yet refined. I perched on the armrest beside her, careful to respect the small space between us, yet close enough that our shoulders brushed occasionally. Each contact was subtle, almost accidental, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. Our conversation flowed with ease, surprisingly natural after the weeks of tension and hesitation. We spoke of dreams and regrets, of hopes that had faded and ones that still flickered in the quiet corners of our minds. She listened with a patience I rarely encountered, dark eyes attentive, head slightly tilted, a faint, understanding smile tracing her lips. When I shared my own insecurities, the uncertainty of youth, the pressure of expectations, the moments when life felt directionless, she responded not with advice, but with acknowledgement, a quiet reassurance that my feelings were valid and seen. The physical closeness grew without urgency. She shifted slightly, resting her hand lightly on the arm of the sofa, near mine, and I felt the warmth radiating from her skin. I let my hand hover nearby, noticing the soft pulse, the subtle rhythm of her presence, and allowed myself to simply be near her. Her eyes caught mine across the distance, dark and expressive, and the unspoken message was clear: we could take our time. We didn't need to rush into definitions or expectations. This connection, fragile yet profound, could be savored in its own measured pace. Light streamed in through the window, catching the curve of her cheek, the delicate shadow beneath her jaw, illuminating the soft tanned tone of her skin and the glimmer of warmth in her eyes. Each detail was heightened by the intimacy of the setting, the quiet hum of the city outside, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the pages of books, the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath our shifting weight. It was in these small, sensory moments that I felt the depth of our bond more than any words could convey. By the time the afternoon gave way to early evening, there was a sense of reconciliation, not of conflict, but of alignment. The hesitation that had shadowed our encounters was replaced with a gentle reckoning, the acknowledgement of mutual respect, understanding, and a deep emotional connection. She rested her hand closer to mine now, lightly brushing my fingers as she spoke, and I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat, as if it had always belonged there. For the first time in weeks, I felt a profound sense of clarity. This connection was no longer tentative. It was alive, real, and fully present. There was no rush, no pressing need to define it. It simply existed, strong and patient, waiting for us to continue its journey, one quiet moment at a time. The evening air was crisp and golden, the kind of late afternoon light that made every ordinary street look extraordinary. I walked beside her, the 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair, graceful posture, and an elegance that made her presence feel effortless. Her dark brown eyes glimmered with warmth and quiet reflection, soft laugh lines tracing gentle arcs across her tanned, flawless skin. She wore a light cream cardigan over a flowing dress, the sunlight highlighting the subtle curve of her silhouette, and the faint sway of her hair with each step added a rhythmic grace to her movements. I, 24, felt the familiar tension and exhilaration in equal measure, knowing that this moment carried more weight than any we had shared before. We strolled along the riverbank, the water sparkling under the amber light, rippling with reflections of the sky above. The city hummed softly in the distance, but here, on this quiet path, it was as if time had slowed, granting us a bubble of intimacy that was entirely our own. She walked slightly ahead, then turned her head to look at me, her gaze lingering just long enough to make my heart catch, not with desire alone, but with a profound awareness of the connection that had been growing over weeks of small moments and quiet gestures. At one point, she reached out, lightly resting her hand on my arm. The touch was tender, deliberate, and full of meaning. I felt the warmth radiating through her skin, the subtle rhythm of her pulse under my fingertips. Our fingers brushed once more, deliberately this time, and I could sense the depth of feeling she had been containing behind her poised exterior. Every glance, every movement carried the weight of emotions we had been slowly revealing to one another, word by word, touch by touch. We stopped at a small wooden bench overlooking the water. She sat first, gesturing for me to join her. I perched on the edge, careful to respect the space between us, yet drawn in by the quiet invitation. The sun dipped lower, casting golden reflections on the river, and the world felt suspended, as if waiting for something unsaid to be acknowledged. She turned to me, dark eyes steady, a faint, gentle smile curving her lips. "Don't leave me wondering what could have been," she said softly, her voice measured but laden with hope, regret, and tenderness all at once. The words struck me with a quiet force, not a demand, but a plea, a reflection of all the vulnerability and honesty we had shared. I felt the steady warmth of her hand against mine, the subtle pressure that communicated more than words ever could. I wanted to speak, to assure her, to tell her that every moment we had shared had been meaningful, that the unspoken connection between us was alive and undeniable. But I also wanted to let the moment breathe, to honor the delicacy of what had grown between us. We sat there in silence, letting the golden light embrace us, letting our breaths and heartbeats synchronize without rush or expectation. The resolution wasn't about a grand declaration or a definitive answer. It was about acknowledgement, the recognition that our bond existed fully in the present, rich and complete in its quiet intimacy. The subtle brush of hands, the lingering glances, the comfort of shared space. It all spoke volumes, telling us that we had found something rare, understanding, acceptance, and a love that could exist without needing to be labeled. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with its last soft rays, I realized that endings were not always about separation. Sometimes they were about honoring what had been and carrying it forward with a tenderness that promised the possibility of tomorrow. In that gentle reckoning, I knew one thing clearly. This connection, slow, careful, and profoundly human, had changed me forever.